Pancake everyone, dear friends. You probably know that China is one of the fastest growing countries in the world. It is competing with such a powerful competitor as the United States, and it may soon overtake it and become the world's first economy. How, you ask? Well, let's find out. Have you heard that China's economy may soon overtake that of the world's leading power, the United States? In 2021, the Chinese economy grew by 8.1%. The China Central Bureau of Statistics announced the value exceeded the target and became the highest in the last 10 years. Previously, the Chinese authorities predicted the growth of the country's GDP, quote, above 6%. According to the published document, the volume of China's economy in 2021 exceeded 114.36 trillion yuan. The US gross domestic product for 2020, released in 2021, declined by 2.3% and amounted to a total of $20.9 trillion. According to preliminary estimates of the government, China's GDP grew by 2.3% over the same period and amounted to $14.7 trillion. This means that China's economy lags behind the US economy by only $6.2 trillion. If China's currency strengthens to about 6 yuan per $1, China will overtake the US 2 years earlier than expected, as early as 2026. Over the past 6 months, the yuan has begun to rise against the US dollar, to levels not seen in more than 2 years. According to analysts, the reason for the shrinking gap is the pandemic. The coronavirus, which emerged in late 2019 in the Chinese city of Wuhan, quickly spread across the planet and affected the United States the most. China managed to quickly get the outbreak under control and rebuild its shaky economy. Meanwhile, in the US, the unemployment rate rose to 14% and stayed above 10% for another 3 months. China's GDP growth in 2020 is mainly due to traditional industries, not domestic consumption. Chinese exports in 2020 were up 3.6%, while imports were down 1.1%. According to Bruce Pan, head of strategic research at China Renaissance, China will overtake the US even faster, 3 to 5 years earlier than expected. But the more important event will be when China surpasses the United States in GDP per capita. As of 2020, that figure in the PRC, which has roughly 4 times the population, amounted to $11,000, compared to $63,200 in the US. In the spring of 2020, New York Times economics columnist Neil Irwin wrote that COVID-19 would accelerate change in the global economy and change it beyond recognition. The idea of a world economy centered on the US is already falling apart, and China is no longer willing to be a supplier of cheap labor and production capacity. Now, according to most indicators, the US is still the world's leading economy, while China is in an honorable second place, says Yekaterina Novikova, associate professor of economic theory at Plekhanov Russian University of Economics. This balance of power is based, for example, on GDP per capita, where the US figure is 6 times that of China. But in terms of purchasing power parity, China, on the contrary, overtook the US several years ago, Novikova notes. Marina Reshetnikova, associate professor of economics at the PFUR, believes that the competition between the US and Chinese economies resembles a game of catch-up with uncertain rules. According to her, China is increasingly called the world's second largest economy, predicting that it will become the leader by 2028. By cleverly manipulating indicators such as GDP growth and personal income, Beijing has been quite successful in creating the impression of rapid economic growth. Did you know that not all economists believe that China will grow by leaps and bounds in the future? At one time, centuries ago, China was the largest economy in the world. These days, many analysts predict that it will be the same again after a while. True, the many problems faced by the Asian giant, and some it has created itself, will delay the day when China will catch up with the US, once again taking over first place. But a growing number of economists believe that day may never come. China's population is more than 4 times that of the United States. Thus, its economy could surpass that of the United States long before it is equal to it in terms of sophistication. For China's total GDP to become the largest in the world, its GDP per capita would only have to reach a quarter of that of the United States. In a sense, China has already modestly succeeded. In 2016, its GDP exceeded the US GDP in purchasing power parity terms. But China's GDP still lags far behind the US GDP when converted into dollars at the more familiar exchange rate prevailing in foreign exchange markets. In 2021, China's GDP reached $17.7 trillion, while the US GDP amounted to $23 trillion. At the same time, China's economic growth was hampered by its zero-tolerance COVID policy. This policy implies that every outbreak of viral infection must be accompanied by a strict quarantine, as well as the decline in the real estate market. And in addition, China was not engaged in reforming state enterprises and was at war with the United States. In terms of technology, the government's over-regulation of prosperous sectors, such as high-tech and education, has also deteriorated the situation. The Chinese economy has grown by an impressive 8.1% in 2021, but this year, if it manages to grow by even 3%, that would already be a good result. In the long term, China's aging population will bring additional challenges. According to some estimates, the total labor force might shrink by 15% over the next 15 years. China's GDP could come close to or even surpass that of the United States by the mid-2030s, but then it is destined to fall behind again, as China's demographic decline gains momentum. According to the consulting firm Capital Economics, one of the most difficult and most overlooked questions in this discussion is this: what will happen to the exchange rate between the two countries and to domestic prices in these countries? Goods and services in China are still much cheaper than the US average. If the productivity gap between the PRC and the US continues to narrow, then prices will also have to converge, either through a stronger currency or by increasing the rate of inflation. The importance of these processes could be great. For example, Goldman Sachs predicts that China's GDP will exceed $38 trillion in 2031, using 2022 prices and exchange rates in the calculation, and that will be enough to make it the largest economy in the world. But not all of this rise will be due to economic growth. By and large, it will also be due to higher prices and exchange rates. In 2031, China's real GDP is projected to be about 47% higher than a decade prior, at an average annual rate of less than 4%. Chinese prices will be about 30% higher, and the exchange rate will appreciate by almost 13%. It is the combination of these three factors, not just growth, that will determine whether China will ever become the undisputed economic heavyweight champion of the world. Even looking deeply into China's economy, it's hard to say whether it will grow and catch up with the US, or stagnate and become similar to Japan. What do you think the future holds for China? What are its chances for success? Try to predict the future in the comments. In the meantime, here's Pancake wishing you a good mood and a fair wind. See you soon. Pancake, everyone.